Honorable City Council. Today is Monday, January 24th, 2022, and this is the City of Romulus Council Special Meeting Study Session. This study session was approved at the December 13th, 2021 regular meeting for the purposes of discussing the lead service line status for the City of Romulus.
Bill.
And at this time, we will have roll call. Councilwoman Abdo.
Here.
Councilman Barton.
Here. Bill.
Councilwoman Roscoe.
Here.
Councilwoman Talley.
Here.
Councilman Wadsworth. Councilwoman Webb. Councilwoman Williams. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you.
Tonight's special meeting agenda is as follows. Number one, roll call. Number 2, agenda. Number 3, discussion, the lead service line status for the City of Romulus. Number 4 is public comment. And number 5 is adjournment. And a motion would be in order to accept the special meeting study session agenda as presented.
So moved to accept the agenda as presented. Support.
It's been motioned by Ms. Talley, supported by Mr. Wadsworth, to accept this
Okay.
study session agenda as presented. Ms. Talley?
Yes.
Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion approved.
Number 3 is discussion, and to lead off the discussion, we have our Director of Department of Public Works, Roberto Scapitici.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good evening, Council. Good evening, Mayor. If it's all right with everybody, I'm going to take off my mask for this presentation. I think I might muddle it up with that mask on. But essentially tonight, we're going to talk about lead and copper requirements from the state of Michigan and how the City of Romulus have been meeting those challenges. There's been a lot of legislation and a lot of guidelines that have come out that were put into place for 2020. We're going to go through this presentation and talk about those guidelines and how we've met them and what the challenges are in the future for us and what the board might be presented with decisions to have to be made either on contracts or how we pursue some of the other aspects of the lead and copper removal that the state is requiring from us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on with this presentation about ownership responsibility. This slide kind of depicts a typical scenario in a community, and this follows well with our community. This slide was from Great Lakes Water Authority, and a couple points I'd like to make is you can see this right here is the treatment plant. This right here is a transmission main from the treatment plant. That pipe does not have lead. This is a master meter. At some point, we connect to the treatment plant, and we get a distribution line right here in dark blue, and that also, our pipes, our distribution pipes, do not contain lead. So when we hear about lead and copper requirements, where the real focus is right here in yellow, the home, okay? So there happens to be 2 jurisdictions that own a service line, and that's the model for the City of Romulus. That's what our ordinance dictate, that's what our charter dictates. And what there is here is between our distribution line, we have a service tap that comes up to a stop box at the sidewalk. And we own that. So we own from the distribution line to the sidewalk where there's a stop box. And then there's a portion of the main or the service line from the stop box into the home that's in yellow. That's owned by a private property, that's owned by the resident. And this is kind of a key point to make because in a minute here, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about some lawsuits that have occurred with the Great Lakes Water Authority, the City of Livonia, Oakland County, over spending public money on private property. So a lot of folks believe that that's an unfunded mandate, and there's some liability and some case law that suggests that's not what the municipality should be doing. So I want to focus a little bit in this region when we talk about lead service lines. So I'm going to go on here and discuss some of the recent, yes.
Said, I want to replace my water line with the good stuff because I have the bad stuff. He could do that on his own, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of talk about some 3 bullet points that we have on this. This slide's called our recent legal challenges. Then I'm going to turn it over to Steve to kind of talk a little bit more in depth about what happened with some circuit court and some issues and legal challenges with some of the other communities. So the first bullet point, it says Oakland County GLWA Livonia lawsuit challenging Eagle on using public funds on private property. So that's kind of that distinction that we want to know that is out there, that at some point in the past, a homeowner built a house, put lead lines in their house, and then at some point in the future, we're being asked to take public funds to replace that plumbing that's private property, and there's some exposure there, which I'll let Steve talk a little bit more about. Bullet point number 2 is gaining access onto private property. So you might be surprised to hear this. We've been kicked off of people's property wanting to replace lead lines. They've asked us to leave. They've told us that they don't want their lead service line removed. We actually run into those types of scenarios. So that's another point that everybody in the public should understand is when we're removing these, some folks don't want us doing that. Item number 3, the third bullet point, on November 23rd, 2020, Council approved the Resolution 2313, to use public funds for lead service line removal. So in 2020, we had to make the distinction by 2021 that we were going to go ahead and remove lead service lines according to the guidelines, and we will talk about that further in this presentation, but we were going to meet the state standards. And this board, I believe it was entirely this board, had approved us to use the public funds on private property. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to do a little bit more in-depth discussion about some of those legal challenges.
Originally, both the city charter and state law had provisions that said you couldn't spend public funds for the benefit of private property owners. So the service line only benefits that one property owner whose house that it goes up to. So for us to spend the money, we'd be violating our own charter, plus lots of case law on the state level. And Eagle basically ignored that law when they came out with their rules that said we had to begin to replace our service lines at the expense of the municipality on private property. So as was pointed out in the first bullet point, Oakland County, along with Great Lakes Water Authority and Romulus, filed a lawsuit against Eagle to try to get some clarification of that point. How are we supposed to comply with your rule when we all have charters and existing state case law that says we can't expend money for private purposes? In fact, there was actually a Romulus case that's quite a few years old now where the city was going to spend money on a private road to help fix the private road, and they were sued, and that court decision said, yes, you can't spend public money to repair a private road. So it's pretty well established. Unfortunately, eventually after the litigation went on for a while, it ended up getting dismissed by the court without any decision. So we don't have any new case law that says that it's okay to do this, but yet Eagle has pushed ahead, and other places have too, requiring local municipalities to replace these service lines, which right now their number that Eagle's using is on average it costs $5,000 to replace a service line. Of course,
Excuse me, I didn't know I had to push the button. And of course, it depends on the length of the line, So, but on average, $5,000. So it's a fair investment for the property owner as well as the municipality to replace all those lines. But as Roberto said, we brought this back to the council in November 2020, and we discussed this kind of issue with you and the fact that there's no guarantee that we wouldn't get sued once we decided to do this, but we really didn't have any choice to comply with the regulations. To my knowledge, to this date, there's no citizen group that has filed a lawsuit trying to stop spending money on service lines. But that's still a possibility that a group of citizens could say, well, you shouldn't be spending the money that I've paid in through my water and sewer bills to now put in something that benefits only a single private property owner. So that's the status of it all, but the state is charging forward, and to the extent that they appear that in the future they're going to provide state funds for some of this so that we wouldn't even be spending our local money, we're going to be spending state or federal funds for some of these at least some of these replacements. So that's kind of the background of the problem that was created.
John?
Thank you, Steve.
Now, to Roberto, does Romulus have any lead lines that we're responsible for?
Yes,
Oh, we do have lead lines?
yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, further in this presentation, we'll talk about what we've done to
Okay.
date, where we found them, what we've done. So, thank you, Steve, for that. So I'll move on with the presentation. I just want to do a quick educational here for the homeowners too that are watching live or when this gets broadcast on cable. So we have here how to detect a lead service line, and you can see in the photo to the left, that is a lead pipe. It's shiny and silver in color when you scratch it, and a magnet won't stick to it. So if a homeowner wants to know, they can go into their basement or in their crawl space or in their meter closet and actually verify if they have a lead service line. If they do, they should call DPW so we can put that on record, because part of finding these lead service lines at the status that we're at right now is, well, where are they all? Because, you know, it's pretty difficult to find if you're not digging up somebody's front lawn. Again, there's galvanized piping. The state recognizes galvanized piping, which is a rigid iron pipe. They recognize that as a lead service line also. And the reason they recognize that as a lead line is because every service line that taps into the distribution system has what's called a gooseneck. And we know a rigid pipe couldn't form a curvature into the main. So they typically would put lead. So for the simple classification, if somebody runs into galvanized, that's considered lead as well, because we know at some point there's a piece of lead in that system. And then we have what's conventionally used now, and that's copper. There's also a concern sometimes with copper. That's why it's called the lead and copper rule, and the fact that copper plumbing has lead solder. So there's a certain date at some point in the 80s when lead solder was not a provable material to use. And they had materials of solder that didn't have as much lead and would not precipitate lead like they did in the past. So that's kind of as a whole of the synopsis of how we find the lead and copper rule and the reason why we're specifically looking at these three different pipe types. Obviously, if somebody has plastic, that's no issue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about data collection. So everybody understands how we collected our data, and there's a reason why we want to talk about this, because further on in this presentation, we talk about how we met some of the regulation requirements with EGLE. Database collection, we have a bunch of bullet points here. One of the ways we get data on lead service lines is through the inspection department. So we have our staff review tap cards. So every home has a card that indicates how long the service is, where the service was placed, and what type of material it was. Unfortunately, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, and 90s, the accuracy of that card boils down to the person that was filling that card out. So he may have put 50 feet of service, but he might not have put 50 feet of copper service or 50 feet of lead service. So we have to hunt these cards down and review them and find out where somebody had put the distinction that lead was used or copper was used or whatever type of material at the point in time was used. So we hunt and peck through that database to come up with our database for finding lead service lines. The next bullet point, meter readers. We use our meter readers that if we're not finding all this information on tap cards, when our meter readers go out to a house and they're troubleshooting or repairing a meter, they're looking at the service line. We've trained them to look at the service line, do the same thing that was in that slide, scratch the pipe, see if it's lead, see if it's galvanized, see if it's copper, and we have them fill out a form. So that's another avenue that we get information for our database. We also look at the assessor's office database. So we know that homes that were built in the 1950s and back, there's a good chance that they could have lead. So we use that database and we cross-reference the tap cards to further try to pinpoint us where these might be. The building inspectors. When the building inspectors are approving certificates of occupancy, they're also another person, a staff member of the city that's in a home that can easily check a meter to see is there a lead pipe, a copper pipe, or a galvanized or plastic, so we can get information from them as well. And the building department has a form that they fill out and they hand it back to us and we put that in our database. The last avenue that we can find information is our water and sewer crews. Yes?
Occupancy,
Yes.
are these for newly built homes? Or say if I went to purchase a 1950 or 60-year-old home, would this apply?
It applies for all homes, but
All?
obviously, we're not too concerned with the newer ones. But
Okay.
even the older ones that change hands and, go into some sort of transaction, they're looking at all
Oh,
of them.
great, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I would have
No,
forgotten.
no, that's fine. Yep, thank you.
Question.
Good question. So our water and sewer crews that are on site, so we get feedback from them. If we have a water main break in a subdivision and they expose the water main and it happens to be close to a residential lead, we'll let them know, give us a heads up, what'd you see with that lead? Was it a lead gooseneck? Was it a copper pipe? Was it a lead pipe? Was it a galvanized pipe? So those are the avenues that we collect our database. As we move on here, this is kind of an important note that we're going to spend a little bit of time on, because we want to educate the public on what does it mean to have corrosive water that, in the instance of Flint had corrosive water. They did not have corrosion control. And I want to explain what corrosion control is. So what keeps lead out of water? Corrosion control. What is corrosion control? GLWA treats water with orthophosphates to prevent lead and copper from leaching out of pipes. Okay, and we're going to explore that topic a little bit. Orthophosphates forms a protective layer on the inside of plumbing materials to prevent lead and other metals from dissolving in the water. So that's really an important point, and I want to talk about it a little bit more in general. So this is a lead service line, and when we talk about orthophosphate, you can see on the inside of that pipe, there's a protective layer. Orthophosphate coats the inside of a lead service line so lead doesn't leach into the water. And what we do know by testing is it's successful. And we have a lot of instances where we know it's successful because every community in Michigan tests for lead. We know where our lead residual is at. And that information is further given to the treatment plant so the treatment plant can make tweaks in orthophosphate. Orthophosphate is a benign chemical. It does not harm anybody. It's a food grade additive, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Here's a sample, and I was going to pass this around to everybody, but with COVID, I don't want everybody touching this, but anybody's welcome to come to the podium afterwards and take a look at this. This is a piece of lead pipe, and it's from one of our residents. The exact address I don't know, but I asked for a piece. And the reason why I asked for a piece from our crews is because when you look on the inside of this pipe, you will see a white filament around that lead pipe on the inside. That's that protective layer. That's the orthophosphate. That's how we know it's working. So we want to talk a little bit about the milestones because this is a very important aspect of the lead and copper rule, the changes that were made back in 2019 and beyond, or before that, which led up to the 2020 new regulations being streamlined out to all the communities. So Eagle recent milestones to meet updates to Act 399 that took effect in 2020. I'm going to talk about all 4 of these milestones and how we've either met or what our plans are to meet the future regulations with lead and copper. So milestone number 1, January 2020, we were asked to do what's called a desktop inventory. So you remember in the beginning of this presentation, I talked about how we develop our database. They wanted to know at that point in time, because they knew they were putting us under the gun, what we had available to tell them and to tell ourselves how many lead service lines do we have. And we met that requirement. And the preliminary distribution system materials inventory required to Eagle, the city had at that point in time 39 known lead service lines. When we turned in our report in January of 2020, that's what we knew at the time. I am going to talk a little bit about the fact that that was that snapshot in time, but previous to 2020, we kind of jumped on the ball and started removing them. We removed a lot of them. So that's all we had to turn over to the state at that point in time. Milestone number 2, January 1st, 2021, begin removing 5% a year of your known service lines from your system. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in an expanded slide of what we did and how many we removed. And we met this criteria as well. Milestone number 3, by January 1st, 2025. This is actually a big milestone. And this is something we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth again regarding how this impacts our rates, our residents, and how we're looking for funding. Complete a field investigation of possible lead service lines in the city system. And this milestone also has a caveat. The lead and copper, or the lead residual, will be reduced from 15 parts per billion to 12 parts per billion. That's a real big key because I feel that in the future, when this reduction and this restraint is enacted throughout Michigan, I think you're going to see a lot of communities like Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, some of those older communities, they're going to have trouble with their testing to be underneath that 15 parts per billion, let alone 12 parts per billion. And all the systems happen to be in the Great Lakes Water Authority system, so it's just always going to be topic of discussion until they're truly all out of the system. And I think what you're going to see a lot of is corrections in the corrosion control to reduce that number. This is also a big milestone in the fact that, if you recall, milestone number 2 was that we turn over a database from our desktop study. But now what they're asking us to do is by 2025 is go into the neighborhoods and find these lead services, dig up people's front lawns, dig up the road, dig up their basement, their side of their house. This is a very intrusive program, but it's also going to be a costly program. Okay, and we're going to tell you some of the things we've done to meet this criteria as well. Milestone number 4, by January 1st, 2041, so they're giving us 20 years to remove all known lead service lines from the system. So that's kind of the sequence of milestones. They're asking us to try to find them, try to start removing them, try to find all of them, and then get them all out of the system by 2041. So now we're going to talk about milestone number 2 and how we met that. The city removed the following lead service lines from the system. So you can see this is our lead service line removal since 2017. When Flint kind of was at the peak of the lawsuits and the media attention, we jumped on finding our lead service lines and trying to remove these from the system. You can see that In 2017, we removed them. In 2018, we removed them. We removed a lot in 2018. 2019, we removed them. 2020, we removed them. 2021, we removed them. We removed a total of 29 lead service lines. Yes.
Service lines, and I look back on this picture here.
Yeah.
We're only talking about the blue service line, not the yellow service line that goes from the shut-off valve to the house.
Very, very good question. So I want to reduce, or I want to,
I'd just like to clarify that.
yeah, I want to go back in time. When we're talking about these lead service lines that we removed ours and theirs.
Okay,
Okay, so if we had lead here on our dark blue distribution or service line, we removed that. If we found lead just from the stop box to the house, then we just removed that. If both were lead, we removed them both. If one or the other was lead, then we removed one or the other.
okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
To the homeowner?
No. No. There were a couple instances where a couple residents had to pay for their own before 2017 because it was such a gray area. Nobody understood what was happening with the lawsuit. There was, again, as Steve mentioned, case study in Lansing that public funds were used on private property, and it was a lawsuit, and that case kind of stuck with the municipalities. It was really a governing decision made by the courts. So there was a lot of gray area during this time, and we were just left with trying to do the right thing.
What would cause the pipes to be filled up with like this orange color, almost look like rust?
Yeah, that is a byproduct also of orthophosphate. That's a little bit of iron leaching, and that's a natural mineral in the pipe and in the water. That can happen. There's no effects from that. Obviously, we don't believe that that's the best aesthetics and water quality. We do flush for that, but every single community has that issue. It's just naturally occurring in the source water.
So is there any way to prevent it?
Not necessarily, no.
I mean, because it's clogging the pipes up after a year or two. It causes the pipes to get clogged up, so there's no flow through it.
Yeah, well, that's tuberculation. That's a little bit different. Those are heavy deposits of organic material inside the pipe. When we find and know that that exists, we try to replace the water main, but there are alternative types of rehab that you can do to a water main to get the correct flow out of it if you need it for fire suppression or anything else.
So what about if this issue was happening and this is the third time in a home? So it's coming into the home,
Yes.
this particular,
Yes. Yeah, we flush. We ask the homeowner to flush. We put a template in the meter and we flush the home.
so DPW flushed the home?
Yeah, DPW will aid in flushing the home. We'll work with the resident to have them flush their faucet. The DPW member would go downstairs, take out their meter, put in a template, and flush the home.
That
Yes.
didn't happen. I mean, and this is, and you know, I'm saying this because I'm very frustrated. This is our third time, and our home was built in 2005.
Okay.
And when they came out, they're saying that the Wayne County drain off of Wayne Road was blocked. So it affected my home.
I'm
And
not
so
too
now
sure.
I'm dealing with all of this rust color from the water, but it bagged up the pipes. I had to have every pipe from one end of the house to the other end replaced. This is the third time. Something's
Okay, I
wrong.
think we're talking apples and oranges. It sounds to me like you're talking about drains.
Yeah.
We're
But
not
I
this
just
is-
wanted to know.
Yeah, this isn't talking about drains. This is talking about water lines in a home.
So the drain and the water line, because this line, so what's the difference?
Well, you have two types of services in your house.
Mm-hmm.
You have a water service that delivers water into your home, that is a contained, sealed system to our water main. And then you have sanitary drains and floor drains that may or may not be connected to sanitary sewer. They could be connected to storm sewer outside, which could be plugged and backing up your home.
So what do you do to prevent it from backing up? That's what I'm asking.
Oh, you could put a backflow check valve in your storm. If you have like a sump pump exiting the house, you can put a check valve on that so water can't come back in.
So water can't come back in?
Yes.
So even though I have a sump, so you saying if I have a sump pump, have that put on so that particular water can't come back in? I don't have a problem.
Yeah,
I mean, because what I'm saying is, and since we're talking about water issues, it's major when, if you don't have that flood insurance, so every 2 or 3 years, you're dealing with this type of issue. So it has to be something that we can prevent it from happening.
yeah, you could put a check valve on your system, yes.
So I'll talk with you,
Oh,
contact
okay.
you later
Yep,
on in the
okay.
week.
Okay. So moving on to this milestone number 2, I apologize the way the text is, but over in this corner right here, you can see we removed 29 of them, and I estimate we spent roughly about $100,000. And that's $100,000 of city public funds to remove those. So now we talk about milestone number 3. We talk about the field investigation. This is the milestone that the deadline is 2025. I'm going to talk a little bit about these estimates to the left of it, Phase 1, Phase 2, and some of the guidelines from Eagle. But as we kind of talked a little bit about that milestone number 3, we have to go out in the field and actually field verify where we might have more lead service lines. And the state guidelines, what they indicated was you have to look at to include the population of homes anywhere from 1989 back. So if we look at how many homes we have in this city that are from 1989 back, we have 6,000 homes. Well, the state recognized that that is a huge financial burden because these types of investigation, we think they might cost anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 for each home. So what they further went to do is they said, okay, well, once you have that population of homes, look at 20% of them, and if you're comfortable that you looked at 20% of them and you can kind of ID and figure out which homes have them and which homes don't, then call it good and submit that by 2025. So that's the program we have, and I'm going to go over some of the stats. You can see under the guidelines from Eagle, I'm going to kind of jump to Romulus has 6,000 possible homes. For our 20%, that would be 361 homes that we would have to investigate by 2025. So the big question is, well, what's the cost? We think the cost is going to be about $1.2 million. Now, again, very important subject to discuss because, as we all know, this money is going to come from our ratepayers. So that means our rate and water rates could be impacted with these costs. We're going to have to ask the city and the finance department for $1.2 million by 2025 to look for these. And you can see in Phase 1, that's our estimate. As we move on to Phase 2, that happens to be the milestone number 4, where they're asking us to remove them. We think if we find 360, maybe half of them might be lead services. We don't know, but we're making an educated guess, and we think to remove those is going to be about 2.1. So you can see how incrementally the costs can really escalate. If we have to look at all 6,000, we're going to be talking millions of dollars, not $2 million, not $3 million, probably $10 to $15 million or more if you're not going to get good production rates. So again, yes.
Where are you targeting the 20% of those homes?
It goes back to our database, but I haven't started that program yet.
Okay.
And I want to talk a little bit about that program. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the database from the assessing department, the database from everything we have, and we're going to go verify what pool of homes. We're going to look
Yes.
for the earliest homes that were built, those homes in the 1940s and 50s, and those real older ones. That's probably where we're going to focus.
Thank you.
So, along with these costs, there's some pretty important discussion topics. Again, these are big numbers that we're throwing around, big numbers that we need money for. And what we've done to date for this challenge of funding, Romulus had submitted for Eagle grants. So if you recall, 2 years ago, the governor put out, I think it was $260 million for infrastructure improvements. We went after that money. And Steve can talk a little bit about some of the information he's found out of who really got that money and how that was kind of divided up, but it was more geared towards disadvantaged communities. And our angle was we felt we were a disadvantaged community, but Steve can kind of talk about some of the stats of where our household median is, but we didn't get selected. That was unfortunate, but that's our continued pace. We're gonna keep looking for money. We have to look for money, but at the same time, we've got some deadlines to meet. So we've got to come up with the money. Hopefully, we can pay ourselves back, but we still have commitments in the future. We also looked at the Wayne County Rescue Plan. So Wayne County has some available funds. There was some discussions with them. We don't know that it's applicable. I don't know that anybody has been awarded anything in Wayne County or Oakland County for the rescue plan money that's available. That's yet to be determined, but we're still going to march forward with a plan and a project. And if we can score some money and get some partial funding or full funding, we're going to continue to try to do that. So milestone number 4, this one's kind of, self-explanatory. That is by 2041, we have to remove all the known lead service lines from the system. So obviously, we're going to meet that goal. We're going to remove the lead services that we know and we've discovered. We're going to continue to search for lead service lines after 2025. We know that at some point in the future, once we make this 2025 deadline date, that they're going to come back and have probably a revision. It could be from the EPA, it could be from Eagle, it could be the governor or the president's initiatives. We don't know what type of legislation might come out to dictate what we do next, but we're going to be prepared for it. And obviously, we're going to look for assistance and funding. Yes?
When we go in and remove these service lines, are our guys doing this, or are we out, or do we have a company that's coming in and doing that for us?
Yes, very good question. Right now, I do not have our DPW performing this type of work. I have a contractor performing this work. We just do not have the manpower
I would
to
think
do
not.
this. It is very time-consuming, and the residents get very itchy. If they were to see somebody show up and then leave site because we have another emergency, I don't think we're going to get very good, comments from our residents. So we've been using contractual contractors that we have under contract to alleviate this issue for us.
Okay, thank you.
The number of homes that you're looking at total, is it 6,900 or is it 7,900?
6,000.
6,000.
Yep.
So 6,000 total.
Yes.
Because I got information from the state, and I'm not for sure of what it was saying, but it says 7,900 homes, so 7,900.
Yep. Keep in mind, that's how many homes we have, but we've been asked to look for homes 1989 and back. We have a lot of new homes that
So-
don't follow in that criteria.
So the 7,900 is not all the homes that's in Romulus. That's just the homes that may have lead?
No, the 7,900 homes are probably, I don't know where you got that information, but the 7,900 homes are probably the total number of homes that we have in the city. The 6,000 is the database from 1989 back. We have 6,000 homes that were built in 1989 back.
So, yeah, I would like for you to look on that to make sure, because I'm sure we have more, the city of Romulus have more than 7,900 homes.
Yeah, I
So
don't have
if you
that-
can look into that
Yeah,
for me.
yep, I can do that. So as you can see with this milestone number 4, we've kind of touched base on everything that we're prepared for. You can see with this photo, this is the type of social disruption that a resident would see. They would see somebody next to their trees, their sidewalk, their privacy fence, installing a lead service line. So there is an impact, and obviously, we try to minimize that, but that's typically what a program would look like. So I think there's some valuable information here as it relates to frequently asked questions by our residents. The lead and copper testing, I'm sure everybody's going to have the same question: how often do we test? And if that was the frequently asked question, the answer would be every year. So since the updated mandate after Flint, the state of Michigan has asked us to review our number of lead service lines, and everybody follows into a category based on their population. Based on our population, we've got to sample 30 homes, and that's what we've done consecutively for the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the result information, we took 2021 samples, and we were below that 15 parts per billion. And again, we want to stress that that is kind of like the action level. That's where they would suggest that if you're over it, or if wholesale, the treatment plan is over that they were to take into consideration some changes in corrosion control. Now, I do want to kind of elaborate a little bit. When you hear these acronyms, 15 parts per billion, what does that mean as it relates to what you find in the test result? So to give you an example, and the analogy I like to use is if this room were filled with 1 billion particles, okay, so that's basically what that acronym is telling us. They're looking at 15 parts per billion. If this room was filled with 1 billion particles, 15 of them would be lead. Well, we don't want lead at all. But it just goes to show you that's how stringent this criteria is, okay? So I do have the results of our 2020 samples, okay? And for 2020, the 30 homes we tested, our 90th percentile, that's what the state calculates and how they tell you what you're meeting as far as lead, it was at 7 parts per billion. So we were half of what the allowable action level is. So that's where we're saying we know the corrosion control is working and it's successful. Another aspect of just the reduction in how the testing is going to get more stringent, they're going to have, obviously in 2025, it's going to be reduced down to the 12 parts per billion. Couple side notes here. Obviously, the EPA, we know they're making some changes in lead protocol. We don't exactly know what the federal legislation is going to be, but we know it's out there. And again, as we spoke before, we know we're going to have to address and make changes to our program and our protocol in the future. And again, possibly we might see some new guidelines out of Eagle. So here's some pertinent information as it relates to our residents. If our residents want to know where they can see the data for our testing for lead and copper and all the constituents that the treatment plant tests for, they can find that in our Consumer Confidence Report. That Consumer Confidence Report is housed on the city website at romulusgov.com/CCR. And with that, I know we covered a lot of subject matter. The lead and copper is not an easy project or regulation to navigate through. So I hope you found this informational. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer any kind of questions with the data and the material I have at this point in time.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Roscoe.
With bringing this subject up and putting it out there, and of course, we'll have it out there on social media somewhere, if we have residents who are concerned whether we have them pinpointed or not yet, or even if they don't have the issue, what are some precautions? Because a lot of people are all about, being precautious about everything.
Sure.
What kind of precautions can they take inside their home to prevent the lead in the water or what have you? I mean, for instance, the filters on your sink
Yes.
in the kitchen or what
Yes.
have you, just,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question, and I'll give out some pointers. It's not the end-all, be-all, but some of the things that a resident could do is, number one, a cheap and easy fix would be a charcoal filter, a pitcher, like the Brita filter. They could fill that up with water and only, you put it in the fridge and only use that water that's been filtered. They can put a filter system under their sink. They can put a knockout filter at their meter downstairs. They could look at the faucets that they use, okay? So there's a lot of overseas faucets that you might be able to get at a thrift store or that's not on the shelf at Home Depot that is not NSF certified. If a piece of plumbing is NSF certified, it's met the government regulations not to contain lead that would leach. Some of the other things they could do is, obviously buy bottled water. We don't want to promote that. We feel that the GLWA water, I drink it at my house. I'm drinking the same water that a Romulus resident has, and I have no issue with it. You could use bottled water if you wanted. So those are the types of protocols you could take. It's basically filtration systems, a pitcher filter, and just knowing what you have in your faucets. And then obviously check your plumbing. The costlier things to do would be the homeowners that have galvanized plumbing. Obviously remove the galvanized plumbing inside the home and remove the lead plumbing in the home too. So there's some scenarios where there's a lead service line, but there's also scenarios where there's lead plumbing inside the home. So there's a lot of different things to consider.
and one more question, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
And to say that, when we find those lead lines, when we replace the service lines, we're not going to go inside the residents' homes. Like you said, if they have plumbing that they should have replaced.
Absolutely. So one of the things I didn't talk about is where the state draws the line with the lead service line coming into the house, and that's at the meter or 18 inches beyond.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I was just curious, Roberta, you said some of the people do not want their lead pipe removed. What's the outcome of that?
We had one person that did not want us anywhere near their home. I'm not too sure what they had going on with their house, what types of things they had going on in their house, but we didn't push the subject matter too far. We did a little, but then we kind of called it our own draw, and we felt that we didn't want to push the issue any further. Some of those aspects could be they're concerned that we might damage a foundation or we might damage something in the home, and we have them sign paperwork that holds us harmless, because what we don't want to do is go into a home and next thing you know, we're buying a whole basement because somebody said we destroyed the basement putting in the service line. The professionals we use, it's surgical. They go in, they take care of what they need to take care of, and they walk back out, especially if it's a basement or a crawl space. And we don't want to get ourselves into the position where we have all these claims of damages that are just things that, were not caused by us. So, there's a lot of different things that might have a person not wanting us in their home, but those are some of the things we've run into. Some of them happen to be vegetation, flower gardens, trees, things of that nature. They don't want us disrupting. They feel that it's been there all this time, leave it alone. So.
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead,
In
Ms.
regards
Roscoe.
to that, when they don't want to sign those papers to do all that, basically, we have that on record that they have denied us access to do that.
Yes, I've turned some of those records into the state.
So, so down the road, for instance, if someone was to sell their home and a new owner came in, then that could start the process over for that property. I correct?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
one of the other discussion points we have with some of those residents is right now, the lawsuit has not been turned over. So we're spending public money. There could be a challenge coming down the road. We don't know what's in the future, where a resident, a municipality, the state, the EPA, somebody could challenge what's happening in Michigan, and they could force that cost back on the homeowner. So if we show up knocking on your door and want to remove a lead service line, I would assume the answer is go for it. But, you know, that's the risk they take too, because there's some instances where a consent order from a judge forces a resident to spend their own money to remove that.
And with that being said, and I don't mean to ask so many questions, once we have that done right now, no matter what gets turned over later, we're not going to put that cost back on the homeowners that we've already replaced those services for, correct?
Correct.
And the other thing is, I put that out there about changing hands because of the fact that I don't want anyone to think if a homeowner says to someone that's selling their house, you know, I've got lead lines and I told them they can't replace them, I don't want them to think that the next owner doesn't have the right to
Right.
ask to have that done.
Yeah, absolutely. One house that happens to be on Ecorse Road between Middlebelt and Inkster, she did not want us to touch her home. We pushed her. She said, don't. That house traded hands. The new owner came in and said, hey, listen, I found a lead service. We're like, yeah, we knew it was there. I'm glad you came in. What are my options? Our options were, we replaced it. He
Okay.
happened to be doing some remodeling, but at the same token, we knew it was the right thing to do.
Yep. Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mayor?
More of a comment, too. First of all, I thank Roberto for doing a great presentation. We had 2 questions here a few weeks ago, and that's why we set up this presentation, to come in and make sure we're sharing data. And also, thanks for all the hard work you've been doing, making sure we're meeting the state guidelines and requirements. But one thing I'd like you to make sure that everybody's clear on is the Flint water crisis and the orthophosphates. There was a lot of people that knew that that was a bad decision when Flint was choosing to get out the city water and go to a different source because it wasn't treated to deal with the lead service lines. Roberto, can you talk a little bit more about that to make sure everybody understands that that was the problem?
Yeah, so a lot of folks, and even for the public that are watching, might not know or have the inside information with Flint, the Flint crisis, but Flint was connected to Great Lakes Water Authority. They had the same water we had. And at some point in the past, someone made the decision to disconnect because Genesee County developed their own treatment plant. And that treatment plant was being monitored by the state of Michigan, okay, just like any other treatment plant would be. They chose, and we don't know all the details, and I don't want to talk about the details, I just know they did not have a corrosion control plan. And the state knew it, Genesee County knew it, Flint knew it. When they disconnected from Great Lakes Water Authority, they started testing their system. And they started testing and retesting and testing again. And what they found was maybe they weren't following the right protocol to begin with. And that's kind of how that situation erupted. That's the reason why Flint had high lead levels, was from no corrosion control plan.
Williams?
But also, I mean, since you brought that up, also when they did that, they was actually called themselves saving money. That's what Flint was trying to do, call themselves saving money by disconnecting from the treatment plant that they was connected to with Great Lake Water Detroit. But at the same time, you had, and that's why we have to be careful, because everything the media put out there is not always true. Because for almost a year and a half, it went on and on, there was nothing wrong with the water. When they knew from the beginning that, you know, that plant that they were, had connected to didn't have the proper precautions set up to avoid that corrosion and everything else that was in that water. They knew that. And so I appreciate it, as our mayor said, appreciate your hard work and what you're doing in advance, and hopefully every city, you know, not just here in the state of Michigan, but every city, because my husband takes those big pipes to the water station in Detroit, and I'm telling you, he took a picture of it, and it's something. So, to think that our water travels through it. So what he does, he go pick it up, and then he take it to a plant where they clean it out, and then they take it back and have it reinstalled. But to see that, it's remarkable.
Yes, it is.
But thank you again for jumping on top of the issue beforehand, you know, before it gets out of control.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Wadsworth.
So at this point, we're not going to replace any lead lines going to homes because of his private funds, et cetera, on private?
No, we are doing that.
Okay.
We're meeting our obligation of 5% a year, and if we can do more, we would. So we are actively removing them. We're not removing them all at once, because as we kind of talked about, it is a huge financial burden on the city and on our ratepayers. So again, we are still actively looking for grants and grant opportunities. So,
Mayor?
Just one more point. The slide that Roberto showed with projected cost to run two parts of that program. One would be to identify, the other one would be to abate, and you're looking at about a $3 million cost. And the only place to get those funds will be to raise our rates, which we've always been trying to not do that here. So we are working right now with our state, federal and state legislators to make sure that if there's infrastructure money that can be spent on this lead service replacement, which we believe there is going to be, we're working close to make sure that Romulus gets its share of it, and we can put it towards that program. So we're working hard on that one as well.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Roberto? No more questions? Roberto, you have anything else? Okay, Madam Clerk?
Next on the agenda, number 4, public comment, and this is the portion of the agenda for those in the audience who would like to address City Council regarding tonight's special meeting agenda. If you would like to address the City Council, please raise your hand, and after being acknowledged by the chairperson, approach the podium and state your name. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and any additional time will be upon the consent of the chairperson.
Yes, sir.
Tony Heiber, I'm sure we all knew that, I was just waiting. Okay, questions, just so I know. Is there any way for the city to get the filters for the faucets for the homes that currently have lead? So we are doing proactive for these people instead of putting the cost on them. Secondly, how many homes are currently on the list right now for lead replacements? Back in 2020, we said 39, which I've been told there's more than that on the list at this point. Also, in 2020, January, they put down 7,900 homes as unsure. That was the document given to the state of Michigan. So, I mean, I don't know if we found out that some of these are no longer on there, so that's why we're down to 6,000, or what? And as far as lines that have been replaced already, I know of one that's not even on your list that has been replaced because the city said get it done before the new mandate went into play, which is one of my properties. But my question for you would be, and this would probably be through the administration or something, if we're asking the people even, hey, if you want to do your lead line yourself, why can't the city at least waive the $200 permit fee for that? To save them a little bit, since they are kind of helping the city out with replacing it. Like, work both ways. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? No other comments from the audience? Close that part out.
Okay. If there no more public comment, that takes us to number 5, adjournment, and the time is 7:20. Need a motion?
Support.
A motion by Mr. Wadsworth, supported by Ms. Roscoe for adjournment. Mr. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Ms. Roscoe?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Abdo?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Ms. Tally? Chair votes yes, we are adjourned.